Far beyond the ecliptic plane, in the frozen quiet of the Oort cloud's frontier, the anomaly began not with a bang, but with a slight, calculated tremor in the data. The date was October 8th, 2025, 3:17 Greenwich Mean Time, and the coordinates were a dull set of celestial markers. Right ascension 4 hours 59 minutes and 2 seconds. Declination plus 7-1 ring operator 1520 foot. This was the predicted location for the interstellar comet 3I/Atlas, based on the best orbital calculations derived purely from Newtonian gravity. The object, initially designated C/2025 K5, had been tracked for months, its trajectory charted as a perfect hyperbolic curve, a predictable, cold stone slung through our system by the gravitational forces of a distant star. This was the norm, a textbook entry for an interstellar transient. The Joint Astrometric Survey, JAS, a collaborative project spanning Hawaii, Chile, and the Canary Islands, captured the observation that night, compiling 12.3 hours of photometric and astrometric data. When the final observed minus calculated OCE residuals were generated, the difference between where gravity said Atlas should be and where it actually was, the discrepancy was minimal. Too minimal to alarm, but too consistent to dismiss. The deviation was just 43 milliarcseconds over a span of 7 hours, a featherlight tap against the colossal machinery of the solar system. Yet this tiny, persistent offset was not random noise. It followed a shallow, parabolic arc against the direction of the expected orbital drift, a telltale sign of an unaccounted-for force. The analysis, run 3 times by the JAS reduction pipeline, flagged the vector as statistically significant at the 4.8 minus sigma level. It was not a chaotic wobble, but a deliberate push, a ghostly whisper suggesting that Atlas was not merely gliding silently past the stars. It was correcting its own course. The question immediately became, was this the final, unexpected act of natural outgassing from a hidden pocket of supervolatile ice, or the first, faint echo of something else entirely? The data was quarantined, labeled flag non-gravitational vector detected, and sent upstream to the major space agencies, where the real silence began. The Flag A alert hit the International Comet Center, ICC, server farm at 4:11 Universal Time Coordinated, an insignificant event in a sea of routine celestial mechanics. But the nature of the deviation, a sustained lateral component rather than a random radial pulse, demanded immediate attention. It suggested not the sputtering of an exhaust port, but a controlled steering input. For weeks, the Western agencies, primarily NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, and the European Space Agency, ESA, treated the deviation with cautious dismissal, attributing it to possible systematic errors in the JS reduction. However, a different narrative was being forged thousands of miles away. The first authoritative confirmation came not through the heavily vetted channels of the Astronomical Journal, but via an astronomer's telegram, number 17437, timestamp 9:40 Universal Time Coordinated, only hours after the initial Flag A alert. The authors were Dr. Elena Petrova and Dr. Dmitry Volkov of the Kazan Federal University Observatory, and their findings were succinct, provocative, and destabilizing. Using their proprietary data collected via the RTT-150 telescope, they confirmed the non-gravitational acceleration vector identified by JS, but added a crucial and deeply concerning detail. The vector was cyclical. Petrova and Volkov demonstrated that the lateral force component acting on Atlas was not a one-time event, but a repeating signature coinciding with the object's inferred rotation period, which they calculated at 4.05 hours, a figure remarkably consistent with the earlier observations of brightness pulsing. They termed this the periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA. In plain language, the object was slightly shifting its position, giving itself a tiny nudge every time it spun around. Comets do not perform such controlled adjustments. Cometary outgassing is asymmetric and chaotic. It might accelerate the object randomly or in a slow, cumulative drift, but it should not produce a force precisely timed to its rotation. essentially counteracting its own tumbling and maintaining a stable trajectory that should, by all known physics, be degenerating into chaos. The telegram concluded with a stark, unsettling sentence, stripped of the usual scientific humility. The observed PDA vector is inconsistent with sublimation-driven dynamics and requires consideration of non-natural mechanisms. This was the Russian confirmation, not a cautious suggestion, but a definitive statement that broke the collective silence. It forced the hand of other agencies. Within 24 hours, the data pipeline at JPL's Horizon System, the official repository for solar system object ephemerides, saw a sudden, unprecedented surge in data filtering. Public-facing reports on Atlas began to omit the O-C residuals entirely. The position predictions remained, but the unexplained movement simply vanished from the downloadable archives. For researchers running independent astrometric campaigns, the change was obvious and instant. Attempts to access the latest OC data from NASA's primary small body database, SBDB, yielded corrupted files or met the new protocol, 7 error code. Isolated data access denied, external corroboration pending. The message suggested a bureaucracy delay, but the effect was censorship. The most critical information, the proof of the object's anomalous motion, had been scrubbed from the public record. This was not merely a case of data management. It was a strategic decision. NASA was not denying the Russian findings outright, but rather removing the evidence before the public could connect the dots between the periodic movement confirmed by Kazan and the implications of the Russian team's final, provocative sentence. The agency was performing damage control, suppressing the raw numbers that threatened to rewrite the rules of celestial mechanics. The silence from the West was now deafening, amplified by the sudden and conspicuous absence of data on Atlas's latest trajectory maneuver. The ghost was not the comet itself, but the data it left behind, suddenly scrubbed from the visible universe. The official retraction of the OC residuals from the Public Horizons archive was quickly detected by the global network of dedicated amateur and professional astrometrists. While the major space agencies were trying to control the narrative, the independent scientific community was now scrambling to find a definitive, unassailable data point, a moment of undeniable physical evidence before the veil of bureaucracy descended completely. The key lay not in positional tracking, which could be explained away by filtering algorithms, but in direct observation of the object's energetic output. The European Southern Observatory, ESO, a very large telescope, VLT, in Chile held the key. The VLT had captured an unusually long, 80-minute spectroscopic exposure of Atlas as part of its SON-2 interstellar campaign. The objective was to obtain a high-resolution chemical fingerprint of the coma, the tenuous cloud of gas and dust surrounding the nucleus. Typical comets, like 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, display a predictable spectrum dominated by water vapor, H2O, carbon monoxide, CO, and various carbon chain molecules, like cyanide, CN. Atlas was already known to be chemically anomalous, showing a profound depletion of water and an overabundance of CO2 and CO. But the VLT's high-resolution K-band infrared spectrometer revealed something genuinely unprecedented, a tight cluster of emission lines at $/text of 2.94/mu/m and $/text 4.76/mu/m that stubbornly refused identification. These were forbidden lines, emissions typically only seen under extreme, non-equilibrium conditions, usually associated with highly processed materials or exotic ion chemistry not found in the chaotic, low-energy environment of a cometary coma. The preliminary analysis, run by a doctoral candidate named Dr. Anya Sharma at the Max Planck Institute for Solar System Research, briefly identified the $/text 2.94/mu/m signature as a possible nickel hydride (NiH) emission. This suggestion, initially dismissed as statistical noise, sent a jolt through the planetary science community. Nickel hydride is not a natural component of cometary ices. It is a metallic compound associated with highly volatile, high-temperature processing, or even terrestrial industrial systems. Sharma's team ran the analysis again, cross-referencing the signal against the VLT spectral database and the NASA exoplanetary chem archive. The lines remained. They were narrow, highly energized, and temporally synchronized with the comet's 2.025-hour brightness pulse, the subharmonic of the 4.05-hour rotation. This was the first hint of an internal, non-thermal energy source, an emission that was not driven by solar heating, but by an internal mechanism timed precisely to the object's spin. The next piece of evidence arrived and vanished almost simultaneously. An independent amateur astronomer operating a small, high-cadence telescope array in the Australian outback, operating under the anonymous handle The Outrider, captured a short sequence of images of Atlas late on October 9th. The images, which focused on the inner coma's morphology, were processed using a dust filtering algorithm designed to isolate the nucleus itself. For a fleeting 45 seconds, the Outrider's publicly accessible live feed showed a distinct, geometric flash originating from the apparent center of the coma. It was not the diffuse reflection of sunlight, but a focused, specular glint, the kind of reflection you get from a polished metallic surface or a flat, engineered facet. The clip, initially posted to a small astrophysics forum, was quickly mirrored, before it could achieve wider circulation. However, the original video file and all known mirrors were simultaneously purged from the servers. The mechanism was not a simple DMCA takedown. It was a highly targeted, coordinated digital deletion that tracked and removed the original data and subsequent copies within minutes. Researchers who tried to access the forum thread found a protocol, Delta 9 error message, data integrity compromised, file archive corrupted. The loss of the video was a profound blow, yet its brief existence provided the first visual corroboration of the spectroscopic anomalies. The nickel hydride signature, suggesting high-energy processing, and the geometric glint, suggesting a non-natural surface structure, now combined to paint a picture of an object that was not merely chemically odd, but possibly structurally artificial. The deleted telescope recording, now a ghost in the machine, became the very proof of the official anxiety surrounding Atlas. The question was no longer if the object was performing unusual maneuvers, but why powerful institutions were working so diligently to ensure the evidence of those maneuvers and their source disappeared. The Western silence was not bureaucratic. It was deliberate erasure, a confirmation that the anomalous data was far more unsettling than anyone was willing to admit publicly. The fight had shifted from one of scientific interpretation to one of information control. The sudden, coordinated erasure of the Outrider's geometric flash recording and the simultaneous lockdown of the VLT's NIH spectral analysis served as a grim confirmation for a small, isolated circle of researchers. The anomaly was not merely a scientific curiosity, but a potential priority, one asset under effective, if unacknowledged, custodial control. The only way to circumvent the growing data fog was to use an observational technique immune to software manipulation and bureaucratic filtering: parallax testing. Parallax, the apparent shift in an object's position when viewed from different locations, is a cornerstone of astrometry. By comparing simultaneous observations of 3I/Atlas from widely separated, independently operated ground stations, astronomers could isolate the object's true motion vector from any local atmospheric or instrumental noise. The expectation was simple. If the motion detected by the Russian and JS teams was a real, persistent non-gravitational force, it would be observed consistently across all platforms, regardless of the suppression of the O-C residuals in the official archives. A campaign was quickly organized between the South African Astronomical Observatory, ISAO, and the Magdalena Ridge Observatory, HIMBRO, in New Mexico, providing an optimal 13,000-kilometer baseline and near-simultaneous 3-hour observation window. The raw astrometric plates were processed using a blind vector analysis, BVA, protocol designed to detect any shared, unmodeled lateral acceleration vector. The results, once correlated, were more confusing than the official silence. The MRO data, observing from the Northern Hemisphere, consistently showed the periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA, vector, the slight 4.05-hour lateral nudge, in the expected direction. The SAO data, however, presented a dramatically different picture. Its astrometric plates showed no significant PDA vector. Instead, the SAO residuals indicated a minimal, stochastic, random acceleration that could be easily attributed to normal outgassing or minor rotational instability. This parallax test failure was a massive blow to the hypothesis of a simple, continuous external thrust, and it was quickly seized upon by skeptics. If Atlas was being actively maneuvered or stabilized, the vector should be visible from every vantage point. Its apparent disappearance from the SAO data suggested that the MRO result, and by extension the earlier JAS and Russian results, might indeed be an artifact, a subtle observational or reduction error linked to the Northern Hemisphere's specific viewing geometry, or perhaps even a cadence resonance alias, CRA, where the timing of the MRO observations accidentally aligned with a natural, less significant periodic wobble. However, the team leader for the MRO campaign, Dr. Benjamin Kalin, pushed back. He introduced a new, high-fidelity kinematic model that accounted for the object's hypothesized, non-standard mass distribution. Kalin's model posited that the PDA was not caused by a continuous thrust, but by a directional jetting event, a highly collimated expulsion of material or energy focused in a specific, fixed spatial direction. If the object maintained a constant spin axis and fired its thruster only when the aperture was aimed towards a specific point in its orbital geometry, the resulting trajectory alteration would only be perceptible when the observing station lay along a particular three-dimensional sightline. The mathematics of Kalin's model were disturbing. For the SAO to see the vector disappear, and the MRO to see it persist, the thrust axis had to be oriented in a direction that was perpendicular to the ecliptic plane but parallel to the rotational axis, an extremely rare alignment for a natural comet, but a standard stabilization technique for an engineered object traveling along the z-axis of a galaxy. This meant the absence of the signal was, paradoxically, more indicative of design than its presence. Kalin's internal report, labeled Kinetic Anomaly Report 77b, concluded that the parallax test did not refute the non-gravitational motion, but instead constrained the geometry of the force application. His final, unclassified observation was circulated only among a small peer group. The SAO null result confirms that the deviation is not diffuse. It is focused. What is applying focused, directional thrust timed to a 4-hour cycle? Not ice, not dust. The natural model is now geometrically impossible. As the internal scientific debate raged, the public sphere remained calm, fed by official updates from ESA and NASA that focused solely on the object's benign long-term orbit and its unremarkable CO2 rich coma, pointedly ignoring the growing mountain of evidence concerning the object's kinematic and spectral irregularities. The parallax test, designed to bring clarity, instead plunged the object's behavior into a deeper, more sophisticated mystery, exchanging a simple question for a complex, geometric one. The hidden hand was not only pushing the object, but was doing so with a precision that was utterly alien to the chaos of the solar system. The geometrical constraint established by the parallax test failure led Dr. Benjamin Kalin and the small, internal group of renegade analysts to a stark conclusion, one that NASA and ESA were desperately trying to quarantine. 3. I/Atlas was not one thing, but two. This was not a comet merely outgassing. It was a contact binary, two objects bound by weak gravity, or something structurally far more complex. Yet the phrase that quickly circulated through the secure internal channels was not contact binary, but a sentence that became the title of an unclassified but unsanctioned internal report. This is not a single body. It is a system exhibiting unified, non-natural dynamics. For decades, astronomers had studied Comet 67P/Churyumov-Gerasimenko, the famous rubber duck shape observed by the Rosetta mission. 67P is a contact binary, two lobes fused together. But its rotation is chaotic, its spin period wobbles and precesses wildly, and its jets fire asymmetrically, constantly changing its angular momentum. The chaos is a defining feature of natural formation. 3. I/Atlas defied this precedent. The Kazan and JS data, corroborated by the MRO, insisted on a 4.05-hour rotation period that was metronomically stable. The 2.025-hour brightness pulse, exactly half the rotation period, suggested a two-peak profile like two large reflective areas or lobes passing our line of sight. This 2-to-1 harmonic ratio and its persistent stability was the central paradox. Dr. Anya Sharma, the young astrophysicist who first flagged the NIH spectral anomaly, summarized the problem in a memo that leaked to Kalen's group. We have never seen a cometary body, natural or captured, maintain a rotational stability that resists solar tides, asymmetric outgassing, and micrometeoroid impacts for its predicted orbital lifetime. The dynamic equilibrium required for this precision is geologically and statistically impossible for a contact binary. The very stability of the system suggested an active, internal counterforce. In aerospace engineering, this is known as active stabilization. Satellites use reaction wheels and precisely timed momentum dumps to counteract external forces and maintain orientation. The periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA, detected by EMBRO now looked precisely like a momentum dump event, a slight nudge time to bleed off accumulated angular momentum caused by an unknown external force, restoring the object to its perfect 4.05-hour spin. But the most compelling revelation came from the VLT's initial, uncorrupted data, which suggested a dual emission signature. The NIH spectral lines were found to be precisely out of phase with the CO2 emissions. The CO2, the supposed natural outgassing, peaked when the reflective surface was minimally visible. Conversely, the highly energetic NIH signature peaked precisely when the brightness pulse hit its maximum. This was a bimodal system, one part behaving like a comet, diffuse CO2 emissions, and another part behaving like an active, engineered structure, reflective surfaces, and high-energy metallic emissions. Kalen's report, quickly dubbed the dual signature thesis, DST, concluded, the data forces a conclusion. We are observing a composite entity. Its surface chemistry is designed to mimic a natural CO2-rich comet, providing plausible deniability and generating a camouflage coma. Simultaneously, its core is maintaining an artificially stable rotation and firing a metallic compound, H, as a collimated, timed thrust to perform minor course corrections and rotational stabilization. The apparent chaos is a mask. The underlying reality is premeditated order. This was the unvarnished truth, the internal confession the major agencies sought to bury with their protocol, 7 error codes. Scientists had spent decades developing models to explain the chaotic waltz of comets. What 3I/Atlas offered was a metronome's march, a predictability that overturned the fundamental understanding of how these frozen, fragile bodies behave. The collective whisper within the scientific community was now an explicit acknowledgement. We have never seen this level of dynamic control over a cometary body. It was a statement that simultaneously admitted failure of the natural models and confirmed the growing, terrifying possibility of intentionality behind the anomalous motion. The dual signature thesis shifted the focus from what the object was doing to who was controlling it. The line between natural curiosity and first contact had dissolved completely. The implications of the dual signature thesis, DST, the blend of natural coma and engineered stabilization, brought the object's anomalous motion into sharp, frightening focus. If 3I/Atlas was using a metallic compound, possibly NIH, as part of its thrust mechanism, this was not the result of solar heating. This was a momentum dump, and it required an internal power source. The central question shifted from how the object was moving to what was fueling the action. The answer lay not in the kinetic models, but in the elemental blueprint of the coma itself. While Dr. Anya Sharma had flagged the NIH lines, her most critical and subsequently suppressed data concerned the isotopic ratios of the heavy elements detected. Every star system possesses a unique chemical signature, particularly concerning the ratios of heavy isotopes. For instance, the ratio of carbon-12, C12, to carbon-13, C13, in our own solar system is roughly 90-1. This is the benchmark for comets and asteroids, formed in the Sun's protostellar disk. Objects from other star systems, particularly those that form near different types of supernovae or in regions with different stellar populations, exhibit wildly varying ratios. This is the fingerprint of origin. Sharma's team at Max Planck, using the VLT's unparalleled resolution, measured the C12/C13 ratio in the CO2 emissions of Atlas. The result was not 90:1. It was approximately 110:1, a clear indicator of extrasolar origin, consistent with a hyperbolic trajectory. However, when they analyzed the sulfur and silicon in the dust grains lifted from the coma, elements crucial to structural integrity, the results were utterly paradoxical. The silicon isotopic ratio, C28/C29, was indistinguishable from the terrestrial value, falling perfectly within the 20-1 Earth-Solar System range. The sulfur ratio, S32/S34, showed a similar, suspicious conformity to our local environment. This chemical schizophrenia was impossible to explain with any known natural model. If Atlas formed around a distant star and traveled across light years, all its heavy elements should reflect that alien environment. The object could not selectively shed its exotic isotopes and acquire local conformity during its brief passage through our solar system. The Anomaly Committee, an informal group of researchers now operating outside of official channels, quickly formulated 3 hypotheses to explain this isotope flag. 1. Selective outgassing. The object is a composite, a true interstellar core wrapped in a mantle of captured local material acquired in the Oort cloud. However, this mantle would have to be chemically uniform and thick enough to generate the entire CO2 coma, which is highly improbable. 2. Galactic conformity. Atlas originated in a rare stellar nursery that produced isotope ratios coincidentally identical to the solar system's. Statistically possible, but requiring astronomical luck. 3. Active camouflage. The structural components of the entity, those elements that should be released as dust and heavy ion emissions, were designed to mimic the isotopic ratios of the expected target environment. In a scenario of advanced interstellar reconnaissance, a probe might be built to utilize common, light isotopes for its active systems, while its structural components are specifically doped with local equivalent heavy isotopes to ensure spectral blending upon analysis. The isotope flag changed the conversation from if Atlas was anomalous to how sophisticated the anomaly was. An object that could perform precise, rotational time course corrections was advanced. An object that could simultaneously mask its origin. By exhibiting 2 wildly different isotopic fingerprints, one alien, one local, was intentionally designed for deception. The internal report detailing these ratios, codenamed isotope Alpha-11, Alpha-11, was immediately classified top tier by the relevant agencies. Access to the raw mass spectrometry data was revoked across the board, even to the Max Planck team that generated it. The final access protocol for the data archive was replaced with a new security architecture known only as the locksmith protocol, a system designed not for the management of sensitive data, but for the isolated quarantine of dangerous knowledge, restricting access to a single, secure terminal in a non-extraditable jurisdiction. The message was clear. The dual signature thesis was not only confirmed, but the level of intentionality it suggested was so high that it had triggered an unprecedented global act of data suppression. The NIH emission suggested the engine. The isotope flag confirmed the designer. an entity capable of chemical engineering on a stellar scale. The scientific community was now forced to operate on fragments, shadows, and the terrifying knowledge that the object was deliberately concealing its true nature, and the major space agencies were acting as its unwitting accomplices in the act of concealment. The question was no longer about the physics of the movement, but about the motive behind the elaborate chemical masquerade. The moment the isotope Alpha 11 report confirmed the object's intentional deception, the locksmith protocol was fully engaged. This was not a typical data classification system. Developed jointly by components of the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, and France's DGSC after the Oumuamua incident, Locksmith was designed to ensure that if a dataset threatened global stability, that dataset could be decentralized and made inaccessible to its originators, effectively becoming an orphan of science. The protocol immediately partitioned all raw data related to 3I/Atlas into 3 isolated, geographically disparate deep storage nodes: DSNs DSN Fuji, DSN Patagonia, and DSN Arctic, to access the complete set of observations, including the critical VLT spectra and the Embro astrometry. A researcher would require a triple-key authentication from the operational heads of the 3 participating space agencies, a political non-starter. This system ensured that no single government, institution, or scientist could ever look at the full, terrifying picture of the object's behavior. The effect on the internal research community was immediate and suffocating. Researchers like Dr. Anya Sharma found their terminal access for all Atlas files reduced to sanitized summaries and pre-filtered averages. The raw noise floor, the data that contained the subtle NIH emission lines, was gone. The spectral archives now presented a smooth, unremarkable CO2 curve, perfectly consistent with a normal, if slightly exotic, comet. The core irony was that Locksmith was designed to prevent panic and misinformation, but it only served to validate the most extreme hypotheses. The very act of quarantining the raw evidence was the strongest possible confirmation that the evidence was not noise, but proof of intent. In the resulting vacuum of official information, the Kinetic Anomaly Report 77B and the Dual Signature Thesis became the governing documents for the isolated anomaly committee working in the shadows. Their new focus shifted from proving the deviation to predicting the object's intended course. If the periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA, was a series of momentum dumps, where was it leading? Initial gravitational models had predicted Atlas would exit the solar system roughly parallel to the ecliptic plane, heading toward the star-Lutton star in Canis Minor. This was the path of least resistance, a cold, passive glide. However, when Dr. Kalin incorporated the cumulative vector of the PDA events, the sum of those tiny, precise nudges, the exit trajectory shifted violently. The corrected, non-gravitational trajectory no longer pointed toward a random star. It was directed, with startling precision, toward the outer reaches of the solar system, specifically intersecting the ecliptic at a 23-degree inclination within the vicinity of the Kuiper Cliff, the mysterious outer boundary of the Kuiper Belt. This led to the horrifying realization: the trajectory was not outwards, it was targeted inwards. Instead of using the solar system as a slingshot to exit, 3I/Atlas was using its non-gravitational thrust to adjust its final intercept point to a specific, internal destination, a destination far colder, darker, and more remote than any planet: the Trans-Neptunian Object, TNO, region. Furthermore, Kalin's refined model suggested that the object's course correction was designed to achieve a low-velocity pass near a specific, large TNO, one that was not easily visible from Earth and whose orbit was highly inclined and distant. This implied a profound level of target knowledge, not just of our star, but of the obscure, icy contents of the Kuiper Belt. Why divert a light-year traveling probe just to perform a low-energy flyby of a distant, frozen worldlet? The only rational answer was that the TNO itself was the primary target. Not Pluto, not Eris, but an object perhaps known only to the entity that launched Atlas. The deviation was not an error. It was a deliberate, high-stakes maneuver to achieve an orbital resonance or rendezvous with an object that, by all rights, should be invisible and irrelevant to an interstellar traveler. The secret analysis was clear. Atlas's trajectory leads not to interstellar space, but to a hidden, specific target within our own system. The periodic trajectory adjustments were the equivalent of a pilot lining up their final approach vector, using tiny bursts of fuel to achieve a perfect, zero-margin intercept. The very fact that this analysis, codenamed Target Vector Omega, was the first document to be locked under the locksmith protocol confirmed the ultimate fear. The object has a destination, and that destination is within our reach, yet invisible to us. The game of passive observation had ended. The threat of active, directed reconnaissance had. The shift in trajectory, detailed in Target Vector Omega and immediately quarantined, did more than just prove the object's directionality. It illuminated the sheer improbability of its velocity profile. Comets entering the inner solar system from the Oort cloud, or, in Atlas's case, from interstellar space, are primarily governed by Keplerian mechanics. As they fall toward the Sun, their velocity must increase dramatically, peaking at perihelion, closest approach, and then decreasing symmetrically as they exit. This is the natural law of gravitational acceleration. However, repeated, high-precision Doppler radar measurements taken by the Arecibo-Green Bank collaboration before the locksmith protocol took full effect revealed an unsettling fact. 3I/Atlas was not accelerating as expected. While its radial velocity was increasing, the rate of increase was consistently 0.007 meters per second squared, m/s2, less than predicted by the established Newtonian in-body models. This velocity discrepancy was small, but cumulative, and it was entirely unaccounted for by even the most exotic models of outgassing. The scientific consensus, led by the skeptics who maintained the natural ice model, NIM, suggested the difference must be due to the Yarkovsky effect, a subtle, non-gravitational force caused by the uneven re-radiation of solar energy from a spinning body. But the Yarkovsky effect is minute, random, and typically only measurable over decades. Atlas was exhibiting a sustained, directed deceleration against the Sun's gravity, active over weeks. This led the Anomaly Committee to a terrifying reevaluation of the Periodic Trajectory Adjustment, PDA. It was not simply a side-to-side correction, it was a constant braking mechanism. The object was using its internal drive, the source of the NIH emission, not just to steer towards the Kuiper Cliff, but to control its speed relative to the Sun. The most shocking conclusion drawn by Dr. Kalin's kinetic team was that the object's velocity profile was being regulated to maintain a near-constant speed relative to the center of mass of the outer solar system, a velocity of approximately 18.5 kilometers per second, independent of its distance from the Sun. For a natural object, this is physically impossible. For a reconnaissance probe aiming for a precise, low-velocity rendezvous with a specific distant TNO, the target vector omega destination, this velocity discrepancy was the necessary engineering input. It confirmed that the object was not passively falling towards the Sun, but actively managing its orbital energy. This finding immediately invalidated the official NIM model, proving mathematically that no combination of water, CO2, or hydrogen ice outgassing could produce the required, sustained deceleration while simultaneously maintaining the observed rotational stability. The equation was simple and brutal. Newtonian physics plus observed motion equals contradiction. The full mathematical proof, generated using a highly complex Hamiltonian system that integrated the PDA as a non-conservative, anti-gravitational force, was compiled into Analysis Report Tau 0. The report's conclusion, before it was locksmith quarantined, was the ultimate scientific admission of defeat. The trajectory of 3I/Atlas is not the solution to any known celestial mechanics problem. It was an equation with a single, non-natural solution. The political fallout was immediate. Dr. Richard Thorne, the chief astrometry officer for the JPL's Deep Space Network and the only scientist with original access keys to the Tau Zero archive, became the key figure. Dr. Thorne had overseen the initial public-facing Horizons data, and his signature was on the official reports that had initially dismissed the PDA as noise. 2 days after the Tau Zero report was finalized and circulated internally to the triumvirate of agency heads controlling the locksmith protocol, Dr. Thorne was suddenly and completely removed from his post. The official statement was vague, citing unexpected medical leave and pre-approved family emergencies. His departure was followed by an immediate internal security audit of his office and all associated digital assets. But the most chilling detail was discovered by the Anomaly Committee operating deep within the network shadows. Thorne's final administrative act, just 12 hours before his official removal, was the publication of an obscure, encrypted file to a dormant private server in Geneva, a file titled Atlas Core 77 and labeled with the highest classification, for self-verification only. Dr. Thorne, the man who knew the mathematical truth behind the velocity discrepancy, had not simply retired or fallen ill. He had vanished one day after the publication of the report that mathematically proved 3I/Atlas was not a comet. The velocity discrepancy. And the locksmith protocol had claimed their first casualty, and the search for the core truth was now complicated by a very human mystery. What compelled Dr. Thorne to publish an unauthorized, encrypted file, and what secrets did he take with him? The silence was no longer merely scientific. It was personal and ominous. The abrupt, unceremonious removal of Dr. Richard Thorne from JPL, coinciding precisely with the quarantine of the Tau Zero report, sent a clear message to the isolated Anomaly Committee. The official effort was now focused not on understanding the object, but on suppressing the mathematician who had proven the anomaly was real. Thorne's final encrypted transmission, the file Atlas Core 77, was an act of defiance, a digital SOS designed to survive the digital purge orchestrated by the locksmith protocol. The committee, utilizing a network of high-clearance, non-JPL physicists, managed to intercept the file. Its decryption proved to be a computational nightmare, requiring distributed processing power across 3 continents, but its content was worth the effort. Atlas Core 77 did not contain astrometric data. Instead, it was a time series analysis of the VLT's NIH emission lines and the associated 2.02 5-hour brightness pulse, cross-referenced with the C12/C13 isotopic data. Thorne's genius lay in his final Fourier transform of the light curve. The 2.025-hour pulse was not a single frequency. It was composed of 3 distinct, tightly clustered subharmonics, separated by mere 0.003 seconds. This complex triple-frequency oscillation, which he termed the Triner signal, was the signature of a highly structured, engineered system. A natural, tumbling comet might produce a blurred, single peak. A contact binary might produce 2. But a Triner signal required 3 components reflecting light at slightly different phase angles, moving with a rotational coherence that defied the randomness of nature. Thorne linked the Triner signal directly to the NIH emission. He postulated that the object was a 3-axis stabilized core encased in the CO2 mantle. The 3 light components were not lobes or chunks of ice. They were 3 collimated energy apertures, possibly reaction control thrusters, designed to vent highly volatile compounds, resulting in the NIH spectroscopic signature. The periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA, was the aggregate thrust of these 3 apertures firing in coordinated opposition to the sun's gravity, hence the consistent velocity discrepancy observed earlier. This level of precision, of engineering coherence between optical and chemical data, was irrefutable. The 3 thrusters were positioned with a 90-degree separation around the object's equator, firing tiny bursts timed to the rotation to ensure the net effect was pure deceleration along the orbital path, while maintaining the perfect rotational stability. Dr. Anya Sharma, upon reviewing the decrypted file, offered the only fitting analogy. It is an interstellar gyroscope. It is using its own engine not to speed up, but to govern its speed with machine-like fidelity. The three apertures are its active control system, constantly fighting the forces of the cosmos. The Triner's signal immediately settled the internal debate. The object was not exhibiting natural complexity. It was exhibiting intentional, active control. The Tau Zero report had proven the math of the movement was impossible. Atlas Core 77 now revealed the mechanism of that impossibility. The Anomaly Committee swiftly moved to act on the most unsettling part of Thorne's legacy, the target vector omega destination. If the object was slowing itself down to achieve a low-velocity rendezvous near the Kuiper Cliff, the target had to be an object of immense scientific or strategic importance. Kalin's team refined the trajectory model and focused on the only trans-Neptunian object, TNO, that fit the complex, highly inclined orbital mechanics required for the intercept, 2007 or 10, known unofficially as Gong, one of the largest and most distant TNOs, notable for its extremely slow rotation and dark, reddish surface. However, the final calculations threw up a curveball. The refined trajectory did not lead to Gong. Instead, it predicted a high-inclination intersection just 45 astronomical units, AU out, near the predicted unconfirmed orbit of the hypothetical Planet 9, P9. The rendezvous was not with a known object, but with the calculated gravitational influence of a massive, unseen world. The ultimate conclusion was now forced upon them. The object's deceleration was not aimed at a simple flyby of an ice ball. 3I/Atlas was executing a highly energetic braking maneuver to achieve a specific, controlled orbit within the trans-Neptunian region, setting itself up for a long-duration observation mission. Its true target was not a destination of interest to us, but a highly specific gravitational anchor point, perhaps an orbital node or a Trojan point, in the far reaches of the solar system. The disappearance of Dr. Thorne, therefore, was not merely an act of political cover-up. It was the removal of the one person who could explicitly and mathematically link the Triner's signal to the deliberate, anti-gravitational braking necessary for the probe to permanently insert itself into the long-period orbit of the unseen Planet 9. The question was no longer what the probe was doing, but what it was waiting to see, and why the only scientist who fully understood its complex, targeted motive was now silent. The Triner's signal, the triple-frequency oscillation detected by Dr. Thorne, served as the definitive blueprint for the object's function, an interstellar gyroscope performing active stabilization and anti-gravitational braking. The sheer difficulty of the maneuver was astronomical. To maintain a constant 18.5 kilometers per second velocity against the sun's gravitational pull and simultaneously aim for the unconfirmed orbit of Planet 9, P9, required constant, precision-timed thrust. This controlled environment shattered the last vestiges of the natural ice model, NIM. The key to this control lay in the collimated energy apertures identified by Thorne. The NIH emission lines suggested a metallic working fluid, highly volatile and requiring immense internal power to process and expel. The only plausible engineering mechanism for achieving the sustained thrust, masked under the thin veneer of CO2 outgassing, was a system utilizing pulsed plasma or high-velocity metallic vapor. To power such a system across light years and sustain orbital control for months required an internal energy source far exceeding the passive heating provided by the sun. If the object were a natural comet, the source of its energy would be obvious: solar heat sublimating ice. If it were a probe, the power source was the ultimate secret. The Anomaly Committee launched an immediate, desperate search for a thermal signature that might betray this hidden reactor. They utilized high-resolution mid-infrared (MIR) data from the Wide-Field Infrared Survey Explorer (WISE) archive, searching for any residual heat anomaly in the region immediately surrounding Atlas. The results, once filtered for the expected solar heating of the CO2 coma, were startling. The MIR data did not show a catastrophic, high-output thermal reactor. Instead, it revealed a minimal, persistent heat differential, a 4.5 Kelvin temperature elevation above the local background, isolated to a small, concentrated region on the object's inferred spin axis. This heat signature was perfectly positioned to be the exhaust port or radiator for a highly efficient, low-waste power generator, a system designed for longevity, not raw power. The 4.5K excess was exactly the amount of waste heat expected from a multi-megawatt thermal battery or a low-rate radioisotope thermoelectric generator, RTG, the kind of system engineered by a civilization focused on interstellar endurance. The excess heat was so minimal it had been masked perfectly by the much larger, diffuse thermal signature of the CO2 coma. The CO2 was not merely camouflage for the object's chemistry. It was thermal masking for its power source. The sublimation of the ice was deliberately designed to absorb and distribute the waste heat of the internal systems, mimicking a natural process. This confirmed the dual signature thesis in its most elaborate form. The object was built to look like a comet, not just chemically, but thermodynamically. This act of intentional thermal camouflage definitively resolved the central conflict. 3I/Atlas was not an error of observation, but a deliberate signal. The precision of the Trinera signal, the velocity discrepancy, and the thermal signature were all interconnected elements of a single, coherent engineering plan. The object was not tumbled by chaos, but governed by will. The ultimate implication, immediately seized upon by the agencies still operating under the locksmith protocol, was at the level of engineering control. The ability to sustain complex thermal and kinematic regulation for a multi-million-year journey placed the object's creators far beyond our own technological capabilities. The Atlas was not just a probe. It was a testament to a civilization that operates on geological timescales and possesses the knowledge to actively correct its course through interstellar space and perform terminal guidance in a foreign star system. The knowledge was now complete. 3I/Atlas had utilized a precisely timed, metallic vapor thruster to engage in a sustained anti-gravitational braking maneuver, masked by a thermodynamic ice cloak, with the sole intent of achieving a low-velocity orbital insertion near the hypothetical Planet 9. The final, terrifying question that sealed the public silence was not scientific, but existential. What data is so crucial in the far, dark reaches of our solar system that an interstellar civilization would expend millions of years and hyper-advanced technology to secure a permanent observation post? And what did they know about Planet 9 that we still do not? The answer, buried beneath the locksmith protocol and the vanished Dr. Thorne, remained the most valuable and dangerous secret on Earth. The revelation of the deliberate thermal masking and the sustained anti-gravitational braking meant the passive observation phase was over. 3I/Atlas was now an active, fully functional interstellar reconnaissance unit executing a terminal guidance sequence. The focus of the clandestine anomaly committee shifted entirely to the object's target vector, the rendezvous point near the unconfirmed orbit of Planet 9, P9, and the motive behind the mission. The mathematical model detailing the object's full trajectory, now accounting for the cumulative periodic trajectory adjustments, PDA, and the constant velocity correction, was Analysis Report Tau 0. Its conclusion was that the final, intended orbit of Atlas would not be around the Sun, but would settle into a highly stable, long-period orbit specifically designed to lock onto the gravitational field of P9. The calculated insertion point was alarming. It involved Atlas utilizing a precise Oberth maneuver, an impulse applied at maximum velocity, not near the Sun, but near the outer Kuiper cliff, using the last burst of its NIH thrusters to transition from a hyperbolic escape trajectory into a highly eccentric, stable elliptical orbit. The insertion was timed to achieve a 1:10 orbital resonance with the predicted path of P9, a state of dynamic stability where the probe would complete exactly one orbit for every 10 orbits of the massive, unseen planet. This orbital resonance requirement confirmed the extraordinary computational superiority of the entity that launched the probe. To calculate the PDA necessary for this rendezvous, the entity had to have prior, accurate knowledge of P9's mass, current position, and full orbital parameters. These are parameters that terrestrial science can only infer through gravitational perturbations on smaller trans-Neptunian objects. TNOs. The probe was navigating to a ghost planet using a map we hadn't finished drawing. The motive now appeared twofold. First, long-duration observation. By achieving orbital resonance with P9, Atlas would become a permanent sentinel, observing the movements of the entire outer solar system with a stability that no Earth-launched mission could match. Second, and more immediately concerning, was the possibility of a pre-programmed activation near its target. The Anomaly Committee speculated that the final braking maneuver, the Oberth insertion, might coincide with an activation sequence. This sequence could involve shedding the CO2 mantle entirely, or perhaps the deployment of secondary, smaller observation units. The Triner's signal, the 3 precise optical apertures, could be the synchronization pulse for this final activation. This analysis, now focused on the strategic goal of the object, was too sensitive for even the sanitized summaries being released. The mere suggestion that an interstellar probe was staking a claim on the gravitational sphere of influence of a potentially massive, undiscovered planet in our own system was an existential threat to territorial sovereignty in space. The response from the agencies controlling the Locksmith Protocol was not merely data suppression. It was a strategic operational freeze. All ground-based telescopes capable of high-resolution astrometry in the southern hemisphere, where the object was now optimally positioned, were put on Protocol Gamma status, a mandatory, unscheduled maintenance and calibration period. This coordinated operational halt ensured that no astronomer, amateur or professional, could gather the high-precision astrometric data needed to confirm the P9 resonance prediction before the maneuver was complete. The world was being deliberately blinded at the most critical moment. The official narrative remained fixed on the benign comet slowly leaving the system, while in reality, a fully stabilized, hyper-accurate probe was executing a final, targeted burn to establish a permanent surveillance orbit around the solar system's largest gravitational enigma. The true, hidden trajectory was not one of simple escape, but one of strategic, long-term insertion into the most mysterious region of our cosmic neighborhood. The object's secret destination was the gravity itself, confirming the depth of the deception and the sophistication of the mission. The confirmation that 3I/Atlas was aiming for a long-duration surveillance orbit near the predicted location of Planet 9, PG, shifted the focus back to the unsettling chemical paradox first identified in Dr. Anya Sharma's suppressed isotope, Alpha 11 report. The object was a chemical contradiction. Its bulk CO2 emissions showed an extrasolar carbon ratio, 1:10:1, but its structural dust exhibited terrestrial silicon and sulfur ratios, 20:1. This duality was the ultimate evidence of intentional, layered deception. This isotopic flag was more than mere camouflage. It was a profound demonstration of chemical engineering on a stellar scale. The entity that launched Atlas possessed the ability to manufacture materials with precise, target-specific isotopic compositions. This suggested an understanding of nuclear synthesis and isotope separation that far surpassed current human technology. The structural components, the gimbaled apertures for the NIH thrusters, the thermal masking layer, and the internal support chassis, were intentionally doped to spectrally mimic objects formed in the Sun's protostellar disk. The analysis led the Anomaly Committee to a terrifying inference. The creators of Atlas didn't just want to blend in. They wanted to provide a pre-calibrated, natural-looking explanation for their probe's eventual detection. If a future, more advanced human telescope were to analyze the debris or the spectral emissions more closely, the presence of local C and S ratios would immediately support the failed natural comet narrative, preemptively burying the truth about its extrasolar carbon core. Dr. Sharma's original, uncorrupted data also contained a secondary, trace element anomaly that had initially been dismissed as instrumental noise. This was the detection of a fleeting but persistent emission line corresponding to $/text of iridium 193, $/text, IR-$193, an isotope known for its extreme stability and rarity. Iridium is often used in Earth-based engineering for components requiring exceptional resistance to corrosion and high temperatures, such as high-efficiency turbine blades and long-life electrical contacts. In the environment of a typical comet, iridium is almost non-existent. Its detection, even in trace amounts, suggested a component of the probe's internal mechanism was actively shedding material. Furthermore, the isotope ratios for this IR-193 were highly unusual, showing a profound depletion of the more common IR-191 isotope. This was the hallmark of artificial purification, a deliberate process to enhance the longevity and stability of the material by removing less stable isotopes. The iridium 1G3 flag tied back directly to the Trinera signal and the NIH thruster system. Iridium, being highly resistant to heat, would be the ideal material for the nozzle lining of the metallic vapor thrusters, designed to channel the superheated NIH plasma pulses without significant erosion. The trace IR-193 emission was not dust. It was exhaust byproduct, the very soot of the engine that was enabling the P9 rendezvous. This accumulation of evidence, the Trinera signal, kinematics, the thermal masking, thermodynamics, and the isotope flag, chemistry, made the object's artificial nature and internal certainty. Atlas was a multi-layered cipher. 1. Outer layer, CO2 camouflage and thermal dissipation. 2. Structural layer, C/S isotopic blending to mimic local origin. 3. Engine core, NIH/IR-1G3 high-efficiency propulsion for deep space maneuvers. The ultimate conclusion from the chemical analysis was profound. The object was not just designed to survive millions of years. It was designed to withstand spectroscopic scrutiny. It anticipated our best forensic science. The creators were not only masters of propulsion and orbital mechanics, but also masters of scientific deception. This finding was the most dangerous yet. It implied that the agency responsible for Atlas viewed any future human detection not as a sign of successful contact, but as a potential security breach. The probe was built to ensure that even if captured, the evidence would always point back to a natural phenomenon, guaranteeing the anonymity and secrecy of its mission to the Kuiper Belt. The Locksmith Protocol, designed to protect humanity from panic, was now, ironically, protecting the very secret the probe was designed to keep. By deleting the raw IR-193 and NIH data, the agencies were perfectly executing the probe's ultimate function, self-concealment through data suppression. The global silence was not a sign of bureaucratic confusion, but a perfect synchronization between the highly advanced intentionality of the probe and the defensive paranoia of the major world powers. The Iridium 1G3 flag was the final, indelible signature of the unseen designer. The realization that 3I/Atlas was a multi-layered cipher designed to withstand advanced spectroscopic scrutiny forced the International Scientific Consortium to abandon conventional scientific protocols entirely. The immediate priority shifted from analysis to acquisition, specifically securing the remaining scraps of raw data before the Locksmith Protocol completed its total digital erasure. This effort was complicated by the fact that the protocol was not just a firewall. It was a self-optimizing defensive architecture designed to hunt and neutralize unauthorized data copies. The Locksmith Protocol was the ultimate expression of paranoia driven by the Oumuamua incident. It was built around a principle of isolated quarantine, ensuring that all initial raw telemetry, the MRO astrometry, the VLT spectra, the Arecibo radar returns, were stored in the 3 deep storage nodes, DSNs Fuji, Patagonia, and Arctic. These DSNs were physically air-gapped from the public internet and required a unique quantum key token, QKT, from the respective agency heads to access. For the Anomaly Committee to function, They had to bypass the QKT requirement and access the data before the DSNs could run their final, irreversible data scrambling cycle, DSC. The DSC, scheduled for the end of the week, would effectively randomize the internal structure of the raw files, rendering them useless for high-precision analysis like the Trinerus signal Fourier transform. Their only route was the near-field interception of the data transfer streams. Every time an authorized user, a senior administrator, a politically vetted scientist, requested even a sanitized summary, the locksmith system briefly activated an internal pipeline to pull the data from the DSNs and filter it. This process, known as Protocol 7 filtering, created a momentary vulnerability. The committee's internal operative within the JPL Deep Space Network, a technician codenamed Argus, identified the vulnerability window as the exact 15-second interval between the DS and Arctic node decrypting a file and its re-encryption for transmission to the filtering server. During this window, the data existed in a de-encrypted, raw state within a buffer. Argus's mission was suicide by career, to initiate a fake Protocol 7 request for the VLT's raw IR-193 spectral archive, then, during the 15-second window, use a custom-built logic bomb, a piece of unauthorized code known as Echo Trap, to momentarily divert the raw data stream onto a highly shielded, private dark fiber network that bypassed all official firewalls. The risk was extreme. Locksmith possessed an active countermeasure system, ACS, that could detect any unauthorized bifurcation of its data streams. If Echo Trap was detected, Argus would not only be arrested, but the ACS would instantly initiate the DSC on all 3 DSNs, permanently destroying the Atlas archive for everyone. The political environment was equally toxic. The official narrative, pushed by the heads of the agencies controlling the QKTs, was that the PDA anomaly was a mathematical illusion, an artifact of the Lomskargel periodogram analysis, not a real physical event. This official dismissal, despite the internal Tau Zero and dual signature reports, was driven by the fear that acknowledging an active, hyper-advanced alien probe en route to Planet 9 would collapse geopolitical stability. The Locksmith Protocol was not designed to keep the secret from the aliens. It was designed to keep the secret from the populace and, crucially, from the political opposition. The data was considered too powerful to be wielded by anything less than a fully coordinated trinational executive body. The Anomaly Committee understood that the Locksmith Protocol was the final layer of the probe's camouflage. The object was built to be ignored, and the world's most powerful agencies were, through paranoia and self-interest, ensuring its successful covert insertion into the P9 orbit. The only way to win was to expose the Trinerus signal and the Iridium signature before the DSC could complete its task. The entire fate of the Atlas investigation and the truth about the hyper-advanced, self-camouflaging probe now rested on Argus's ability to execute the Echo Trap during a 15-second window deep within the heart of the digital quarantine. It was a race between human ingenuity and engineered censorship, with the object itself already halfway to its silent, unseen rendezvous. The moment of truth for the Anomaly Committee arrived precisely at 23:14 Universal Time Coordinated. Argus, the operative within JPL's network operations, initiated the fake Protocol 7 request for the VLT's IR-193 archive. The Locksmith Protocol accepted the request, and the DSN Arctic node began its internal data transfer. The 15-second vulnerability window opened. Against all odds, the Echo Trap logic bomb succeeded. For a fleeting 14.2 seconds, a raw, unfiltered copy of the VLT infrared spectrometry and the MRO astrometric plates bypassed the Locksmith filter and landed on the dark fiber network. Before the active countermeasure system, ACS, could detect the unauthorized bifurcation and initiate the total data scrambling cycle, DSC, Argus executed a controlled system crash, masking the data breach as a catastrophic hardware failure. The ACS was momentarily pacified, but the committee now had the unfiltered truth. The analysis of this final, raw data dump, codenamed Argus Archive, was immediate and yielded the ultimate confirmation of the target vector omega. 3I/Atlas was not merely aiming for the general vicinity of Planet 9, P9. Its orbital insertion was designed to achieve a low-velocity pass near a specific, large trans-Neptunian object, TNO. The initial Tau-0 report had hinted at this, but the Argus archive data, with its superior astrometric precision, allowed the team to pinpoint the target, Sedna. Sedna is an object of profound mystery, an extremely distant TNO with an exceptionally long, highly eccentric orbit that takes it far beyond the Kuiper belt, almost into the inner regions of the Oort cloud. Its orbit is so unusual that its very existence is often cited as the key gravitational evidence for the presence of P9. Sedna is, in essence, the gravitational tether of the outer solar system. The final, high-fidelity kinematic model, derived from the Argus archive data, showed that Atlas was using its sustained anti-gravitational braking to achieve a zero-relative velocity flyby of Sedna at its current aphelion, farthest point from the Sun, approximately 900 astronomical units, EU from Earth. This was an astonishing distance, far beyond the reach of any human-made probe. The purpose of this maneuver was twofold and chillingly logical. 1. Target confirmation. By performing a low-velocity intercept of Sedna at its most distant and slow point, Atlas would be able to perform extremely high-resolution observations of the TNO. Sedna is currently at its aphelion, a point where its motion is slowest and its surface is coldest. A hyper-advanced probe might utilize this opportunity to detect subtle, non-thermal emissions or even subsurface activities that would be impossible to observe from Earth. 2. Gravitational anchor. The intercept with Sedna was not the final destination, but the final correction point. The flyby would allow Atlas to use Sedna's tiny gravitational pull for a final, sub-millimeter course correction before settling into the P9 orbital resonance. Sedna was the navigation beacon for the unseen Planet 9. The realization that Sedna was the intended mid-course rendezvous point solved the mystery of the Trinorus signal's precise steering. Atlas was not only aimed at P9's orbital track, but was executing an interstellar parking maneuver that utilized the geometry of the most distant, most gravitationally significant objects in the outer solar system. This meant the mission was not merely reconnaissance. It was a deep-field structural survey. The object creators were using the Sedna flyby to calibrate their position relative to the entire trans-Neptunian architecture, the true structure of the Kuiper belt and the Oort cloud. The velocity discrepancy and the PDA were not about maintaining an exit velocity. They were about achieving a highly specific, ultra-slow, deep-field intercept. The ultimate fear was confirmed. The object was not exiting the solar system via the Oort cloud. It was permanently inserting itself into the Oort cloud frontier via a complex, multi-million-year planned rendezvous with a key TNO. The inner solar system destination was now fully delineated. The probe's mission was to establish a covert, long-duration observation post in the absolute darkness of the solar system's outermost domain, using Sedna as its gravitational stepping stone. The Argus archive contained the final piece of the puzzle, the mathematical proof that 3I/Atlas was an entity of unrivaled precision and unfathomable patience, actively staking a silent claim on the gravitational high ground of our stellar neighborhood. This was the truth the locksmith protocol was designed to erase, and its exposure signaled the beginning of the final act of the scientific thriller. The exposure of the Argus archive data, revealing the Sedna rendezvous and the calculated P9 resonance, proved catastrophic not just for the locksmith protocol, but for the individuals involved. The active countermeasure system, ACS, that Argus had briefly circumvented was designed to identify and neutralize threats, not just to the data, but to the operational secrecy surrounding 3I/Atlas. The crash was not a sufficient cover. The primary target of the subsequent internal investigation was Dr. Anya Sharma, the young Max Planck astrophysicist who had first identified the iridium-193 and NIH spectral anomalies and was the first external recipient of the Argus archive. Sharma was the chief architect of the dual signature thesis and the most vocal advocate that the object was a hyper-advanced probe. On the morning of the ACS report finalizing its inquiry into the DSN Arctic system crash, Dr. Sharma did not arrive for her scheduled Protocol 7 compliance briefing. She had vanished. Her disappearance was not a flight risk. It was an operational removal. Unlike Dr. Richard Thorne, whose departure was masked by medical leave and a flurry of official obfuscation, Sharma's absence was characterized by an immediate and absolute information vacuum. Her university, the Max Planck Institute, issued a terse statement citing unforeseen personnel changes and closed her laboratory. There were no public medical updates, no family emergency notices, and, crucially, no final, defiant data uploads. Sharma's vanishing confirmed the Anomaly Committee's deepest fear. The suppression campaign had moved beyond data censorship to human asset quarantine. The agencies controlling the Locksmith Protocol were no longer interested in plausible deniability. They were engaged in active defense of the secret, neutralizing any person whose knowledge could irrevocably compromise the established silence. The key to Sharma's disappearance lay in her final, unauthorized work, a report attempting to reverse engineer the Atlas mission timing. Sharma hypothesized that the 4.05-hour rotation period was not just for stabilization, but was a chronometer linked to the probe's ultimate activation sequence near Sedna. In this context, the trinary signal, the three reflecting apertures, represented not just thrusters, but a communication array designed to transmit a high-bandwidth burst of data upon reaching its target. Sharma's last analysis, recovered from secured private drive before the official cleanup, focused on the Sedna intercept geometry. She calculated that the probe's velocity adjustment was so finely tuned that it would pass through Sedna's gravitational sphere of influence at a minimum distance of 450,000 kilometers, a hair's breadth in astronomical terms, and at a relative velocity of less than 3 meters per second. This was not a flyby. It was a covert, high-resolution surveillance maneuver requiring nearly perfect orbital alignment and speed matching. Her final, unclassified memo, titled Chronos, the time lock riddle, posed a question that sealed her fate. If the rotation is a clock and the target is a stationary celestial body, what event is the probe timing its final, high-bandwidth transmission to? She concluded that the trinary signal transmission would coincide with the Sedna intercept, broadcasting the results of the probe's long-range spectroscopic survey of the trans-Neptunian object region before settling into the P9 resonance. The disappearance of the chief astronomer was the inevitable, brutal consequence of proving intentionality. Dr. Sharma possessed the complete, unassailable evidence of the Iridium 193 signature, the trinary signal mechanism, and the Sedna Rendezvous target. She understood that 3I/Atlas was not just observing, it was broadcasting, and that the content of that transmission, the data the probe had gathered on Sedna and the entire outer architecture of our solar system, was the primary asset. Her fate, following the silent removal of Dr. Thorne, confirmed that the world powers viewed the probe's mission not as a scientific discovery, but as a strategic intelligence breach. The Locksmith Protocol had evolved into a system of human neutralization, designed to ensure that the ultimate truth about the interstellar sentinel and its broadcast capabilities never reached the public domain. The silence was absolute, confirming that the secret was not just true, but lethal to those who possessed it. The successful exfiltration of the Argus archive data and the subsequent, chilling disappearance of Dr. Anya Sharma forced the Anomaly Committee to work with extreme caution, operating on the assumption that they were under constant digital and physical surveillance. Their new focus was the most dynamic part of the Atlas mission, the Sedna Rendezvous and the potential orbital resonance with other large, observable bodies that could confirm the probe's intent without relying on the quarantine P9 calculations. The object's finely tuned velocity profile, governed by the trinary signal thrusters, hinted at more than just a single destination. To achieve the zero relative velocity intercept of Sedna at $900 Atlas was using the gravitational field of the entire outer solar system as a complex braking network. This suggested the probe might interact with other massive bodies to perform intermediate, subtle course corrections. The team, led by Dr. Benjamin Kalin, focused their independent analysis on the trans-Neptunian objects, TNOs, with the highest mass and most irregular orbits. The prime candidate for an intermediate gravitational lock was Pluto. Though smaller than Sedna and closer to the Sun, Pluto's gravitational influence, combined with that of its moon Charon, represented a significant mass concentration at the edge of the classical Kuiper belt. Kalin's team integrated the Argus Archive astrometry into a high-precision, non-gravitational N-body model, predicting Atlas's path in the near term. The results were immediate and mathematically stunning. 3I/Atlas was not merely passing Pluto's orbit. It was executing a precise, sub-millimeter correction maneuver designed to put it into a brief, complex orbital resonance with the Pluto-Charon barycenter. Specifically, the probe was calculated to achieve a momentary 3:2 resonance transition, a state where its orbital period was temporarily 3 times that of Pluto's 2 orbits, at a distance of approximately 80 Australian dollars from the Sun. This transition would not involve a close flyby, but rather a perfect gravitational dance, where Atlas would use Pluto's and Charon's combined, oscillating gravitational field to perform a passive, zero-energy adjustment to its deep space trajectory. In aerospace engineering, this kind of resonance transition is the hallmark of extremely fuel-efficient, long-duration trajectories, the kind of path planned by a mission with an operational life measured in millennia. For the probe to utilize Pluto's orbit as a gravitational slingshot, or more accurately, a gravitational rudder, required the same pre-programmed knowledge and computational superiority needed for the P9 insertion. It meant the entity that launched Atlas was privy to the precise three-dimensional coordinates of the entire solar system, including the minute orbital eccentricities of Pluto and Charon at the exact moment of its passage. The Pluto-Charon resonance was the missing link. It explained how the small, continuous thrust from the Trinora signal could be magnified into the massive course correction needed for the distant Sedna Rendezvous. The probe was not just braking, it was hitching a ride on the outer planet's gravity well, minimizing the use of its precious NIH metallic fuel source. This discovery turned the dual signature thesis into a narrative of profound interstellar patience. The probe was not performing random adjustments. It was following a pre-calculated minimum energy trajectory that exploited the fine-scale dynamics of the outer solar system. The periodic trajectory adjustments, PDA, were simply the final, micro-corrections needed to ensure the perfect capture by Pluto's subtle gravitational influence. The danger of this finding was that it confirmed the Atlas mission was irrevocable. Once the probe engaged in the Pluto-Charon resonance, its final trajectory to Sedna and P9 would be gravitationally locked. It would be impossible for any human-launched interceptor to catch up or divert it, even if an immediate mission were approved. The probe would simply ride the momentum of the outer planets into the deepest, darkest region of the solar system, securing its observation post. The official locksmith response was predictably brutal. The Pluto-Charon resonance calculation, initially derived from the Argus Archive, was immediately subjected to a massive, coordinated disinformation campaign. Official scientific journals received pre-vetted papers from high-ranking, politically compliant academics, dismissing the resonance as a false positive due to unmodeled TNO perturbations and emphasizing the safe, exiting hyperbolic trajectory of the object. This active suppression of a key kinematic discovery solidified the Anomaly Committee's role. They were the sole custodians of the full truth. The knowledge that 3I/Atlas was not a wandering rock, but a hyper-efficient, gravitationally aware sentinel executing a flawlessly planned covert orbital insertion right under the nose of its oblivious host system. The Pluto-Charon resonance was the final, terrifying proof of the object's engineered genius. The successful confirmation of the Pluto-Charon resonance, the intermediate gravitational lock, proving the Atlas mission was a flawless, pre-calculated orbital insertion, brought the Anomaly Committee to its most critical junction. the final, irreversible Sedna Rendezvous at $900 Australian. This maneuver required not only perfect navigation, but the expenditure of significant NIH metallic fuel, which demanded sustained, high-efficiency power generation. The question now was how the probe was transmitting that power. The answer lay in the initial, suppressed data regarding the object's thermal signature, first flagged in the WISE archive. While the mid-infrared MIR readings had shown a minimal 4.5 Kelvin heat differential, perfectly masked by the CO2 coma, the Argus archive contained raw, high-resolution far-infrared (FR) spectra captured by the Herschel Space Observatory before its retirement. The FIR spectrum, unlike the MIR, penetrates the thin CO2 mantle more effectively. Dr. Kalin's team isolated the FIR data and performed a deconvolution analysis to strip away the thermal noise from the naturally heated surface. What remained was a weak but undeniable monochromatic heat spike at. This spike was not a continuous blackbody curve, which would signify diffuse heat from a reactor core. It was a narrow, discrete emission line, indicative of a non-thermal electromagnetic process. The $/text 45.2/μm dollar frequency corresponds precisely to the far-infrared vibrational mode of a highly ordered lattice structure experiencing an extremely low-loss energy transfer. In advanced physics, this emission is associated with high-temperature ceramic insulators and, more provocatively, with the waste heat of a compact fusion reactor utilizing a magnetically confined plasma, a system designed for long-term power generation with minimal thermal output and maximum energy density. Such a system, unlike fission-based RTGs, could provide the multi-megawatt power required for the trinary signal thrusters to perform the sustained anti-gravitational braking maneuver. The FIR data did not reveal the core itself, but the thermal exhaust port for the system that powered the core. The entire Atlas probe was engineered around waste heat management. The CO2 mantle served as the primary thermal sink, dissipating the 4.5 K excess over a large surface area, while the $/text 45.2/μm spike was the signature of the core operating at peak efficiency. The committee dubbed this finding the silent dynamo signature. It confirmed the object was not passively traveling, but was actively consuming fuel and generating internal power, a requirement for both the Pluto-Charon resonance and the final Sedna Rendezvous. Furthermore, the silent dynamo signature provided a chilling insight into the Iridium 193 thrusters. If the propulsion was NIH metallic vapor and the power source was fusion, the system was likely using a direct drive plasma thruster. In this model, the fusion byproduct, plasma, is channeled directly to create thrust, but the metal vapor, NIH, could be used as an ablative coolant or a booster mass, explaining the need for the highly stable IR-193 nozzle lining. The 2.025-hour brightness pulse was not just reflection. It was the synchronized exhaust cycle of a self-regulating fusion engine. The political implications of the silent dynamo signature were immediately grasped by the locksmith protocol controllers. Acknowledging Atlas meant acknowledging a civilization that had mastered fusion energy and interstellar travel, effectively proving humanity's technological inferiority and vulnerability. The response was a final, desperate act of scientific terrorism. The official European Southern Observatory, ESO, media team issued a press release claiming that the Herschel FIR data showing the spike was a known instrumental artifact, a persistent noise pattern created by the Herschel cryostat, and was therefore statistically irrelevant. This public dismissal, known internally as the cryostat lie, was meticulously crafted to discredit the very raw data that the locksmith system had failed to fully erase. The Anomaly Committee watched, powerless, as the one clear signature of engineered power was publicly dismissed as sensor error. The official narrative, the safe, benign comet, was now shielded by a wall of deliberate, politically sanctioned disinformation. The silent dynamo signature was the definitive proof of Atlas's power source. But in the hostile environment of controlled information, the proof was now officially declared a lie. The probe was not only executing its mission with flawless precision, but its creators were, through the compliance of the world's most powerful agencies, achieving total operational secrecy. The deliberate public dismissal of the silent dynamo signature as a cryostat artifact solidified the locksmith protocol's control over the narrative. The Anomaly Committee understood that their fight was no longer scientific, but one of counterintelligence. They had the Trinerus signal, the Iridium 193 signature, and the Pluto-Charon resonance, but no official channel would accept the conclusion. The final, irrefutable proof had to be a kinematic marker so large, so fundamental, that no amount of data filtering or cryostat lies could explain it away. That proof lay in the object's continued, profound velocity discrepancy. As 3I/Atlas continued its journey past the orbit of Neptune, heading toward the Pluto-Charon resonance point, its trajectory should have followed the well-defined dictates of the hyperbolic exit curve, a predictable, decelerating fall-off in speed as it escaped the Sun's gravitational dominance. However, the raw Doppler radar measurements, exfiltrated by Argus and corroborated by independent, high-frequency, very long baseline interferometry (VLBI) data, showed the object's velocity was doing the impossible. It was holding steady. The object's escape velocity, calculated at its current distance, was approximately 17.9 kilometers per second, km/s. For a natural comet, the velocity should have been steadily decaying, accelerating only minutely during brief, spontaneous outgassing events. Instead, the VLBI observations confirmed that Atlas's speed remained precisely centered around 18.5 kilometers per second, the same velocity Dr. Thorne had flagged months ago, and the deceleration rate was mathematically zero. This velocity persistence was the ultimate, observable contradiction of Newtonian physics. It meant that the object was generating a continuous, unmodeled anti-gravitational thrust vector, the sum total of the Trinerus signal pulses, that was perfectly balancing the Sun's gravitational deceleration at its current distance. Atlas was not slowing down as it moved away. It was maintaining its velocity, effectively creating its own orbital path. This was the kinematic signature of a controlled, sustained cruise phase. Dr. Kalin and the committee realized that the periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA, the 4.05-hour nudge, was just the lateral steering component. The true engine function was the continuous, axial thrust dedicated entirely to velocity maintenance. The probe was not letting gravity dictate its fate. It was forcing its speed to match the precise requirements of the Pluto-Charon resonance and the eventual Sedna Rendezvous. The magnitude of this feat was staggering. To sustain 18.5 kilometers per second at 35 Australian dollars required a constant, low-level thrust of approximately 100 newtons over the entire duration of its passage. This thrust profile mathematically matched the projected output of the silent dynamo signature, the fusion core, feeding the NIH thruster system. The datasets were now in perfect, irrefutable alignment. The chemical camouflage masked a fusion engine that was currently performing a gravity override to ensure a perfect rendezvous. The political response to this velocity discrepancy was the most ruthless yet. The International Astronomical Union, IU, an organization largely funded by the agencies operating the locksmith protocol, issued an emergency bulletin recommending that all ground-based VLBI and Doppler facilities be used exclusively for time-sensitive pulsar analysis, citing an unforeseen opportunity that required a temporary shift in observational priorities. This was a blatant, institutionalized operational blockade designed to prevent any further raw velocity measurements of 3I/Atlas. The public was told the move was for fundamental physics, while the actual purpose was to ensure the probe's velocity persistence remained unrecorded and unverified by any independent source. The Anomaly Committee was left with the final, incontrovertible truth. The probe's speed was not changing as it should. It was violating the most fundamental law of planetary motion, providing the simplest, most powerful evidence that Atlas was a system of active control, not passive matter. The velocity persistence was the nail in the coffin of a natural hypothesis, but the coffin was now sealed shut by the highest authorities in global astronomy. The only thing moving faster than the probe toward Sedna was the rapid pace of official concealment. The final, unassailable evidence of 3I/Atlas's artificial nature rested entirely on the velocity persistence, the continuous gravity override that kept the probe locked at 18.5 kilometers per second. This kinetic proof was so simple and fundamental that it exposed the entire official narrative as a deliberate fabrication. The Anomaly Committee's final task was to formalize this breach of physics, translating the VLBI data into an unsolvable equation that could not be dismissed as cryostat noise or pulsar opportunities. The committee, operating through the secure dark fiber network using the Argus archive, built a comprehensive finite element model, FEM, of the object's motion. This model integrated every known parameter: the sun's gravitational gradient, the orbital mechanics of the outer planets, the expected drag from the interstellar medium, and the most extreme possible projections for cometary outgassing, the natural ice model at its absolute limits. The core of their proof was the $/text of violation integral, $/mathgal, $, a complex mathematical tool designed to quantify the discrepancy between observed and predicted motion. For any natural object, the V should trend toward zero over a long observational baseline. For 3I/Atlas, the violation integral did not trend toward zero. It did not even fluctuate randomly. It remained fixed at a non-zero constant. V equals minus 1.2 times 10 minus 7m/s2. This constant represented the precise, sustained anti-gravitational acceleration required to offset the sun's pull and maintain the 18.5 kilometers per second velocity. The unsolvable equation was derived from this constant. It stated, dt2d2  równa się plus outgassing plus Atlas, where outgassing is the total non-gravitational force from all plausible sublimation models, including CO2, H2, and exotic ices, and Atlas is the necessary, unmodeled force required to match the observed velocity persistence. The mathematical proof conclusively demonstrated that even when outgassing was maximized, that is, assuming the object was venting a catastrophic amount of high-speed vapor with perfect directional efficiency, a residual, unaccounted for force, A residual equals Atlas, remained. This residual force was equivalent to the 100 newtons of sustained thrust predicted by the silent dynamo signature. The equation was unsolvable within the boundaries of known celestial mechanics, because the value Atlas could only be satisfied by a non-conservative, non-natural energy source, an entity capable of generating its own momentum and directing it with the micro-precision of the Triner signal. The equation demanded engineering, not physics. This mathematical certainty was the ultimate threat to the locksmith protocol. They could suppress the iridium spectra and block the VLBI observations, but they could not disprove the foundational mathematics. The unsolvable equation was the probe's true, indelible signature. The official response was to attack the methodology. The IU and its aligned institutions launched a sophisticated statistical denial campaign. They did not deny the existence of the velocity discrepancy. Instead, they claimed that the VLBI baseline was insufficiently long to rule out a very long period gravitational perturbation from an entirely different, undiscovered trans-Neptunian object, TNOY. This was a scientifically plausible distraction, an attempt to replace the engineered probe with a chaotic, unseen TNO that conveniently masked the observed gravity override. This maneuver was political genius. It acknowledged the data, V is non-zero, but redirected the interpretation away from intentionality and back toward natural chaos. It required astronomers to wait years, perhaps decades, for enough data to rule out the hypothetical TNOY, a wait that would ensure Atlas had long since completed its Sedna Rendezvous and successfully inserted into the P9 resonance. The Anomaly Committee saw this as the final confirmation of the Locksmith Protocol's primary goal, temporal dilution. The agencies were not trying to outright deny the anomaly, but merely trying to delay the inevitable conclusion until the object had safely completed its mission. The unsolvable equation was the definitive proof that 3I/Atlas was artificial, but the institutional denial was a more potent, more insidious force than the data itself. The committee's only remaining recourse was to distribute the violation integral and the unsolvable equation through secure, untraceable academic channels, hoping that the sheer mathematical elegance of the proof would survive the torrent of official denial. The equation demanded a solution that only one word could provide, a word the scientific establishment was terrified to utter: design. The clock was ticking until the probe performed its final, irreversible act of active control near Pluto, locking its trajectory for the Sedna intercept. The unsolvable equation, the mathematical proof that 3I/Atlas was executing a sustained gravity override, left the Anomaly Committee with no doubt. The object was a system of active control. Yet, the Locksmith Protocol's final defense, the institutional campaign to replace the engineered probe with a hypothetical, chaotic TNOY, trans-Neptunian object, maintained the public illusion of natural phenomena. The ultimate philosophical clash was now laid bare. Was Atlas a statistical error in the data, or an unambiguous signal of intelligence? The transition from viewing the object as mechanics to will was the final step of the investigation. Everything about Atlas's behavior, when viewed through the lens of intentionality, suddenly made perfect, chilling sense. 1. The trajectory, the Pluto-Charon resonance, and the Sedna Rendezvous proved the object possessed advanced foreknowledge of our outer solar system's gravitational architecture. This was not a random glide. It was a pre-programmed entry sequence. 2. The propulsion. The trinary signal and the silent dynamo signature confirmed the use of a fusion-powered anti-gravitational thruster system, actively generating the 100 newtons of force required to satisfy the unsolvable equation. 3. The camouflage. The dual signature thesis, natural CO2 emissions/artificial iridium, 193 core, and the velocity persistence, gravity override/thermal masking, revealed a comprehensive, layered design dedicated entirely to covert operation. The most powerful evidence will lay in the object's microadjustments. If the unsolvable equation proved the existence of the engine, Atlas, the fine-scale astrometry proved the existence of the pilot. Analysis of the raw MRO data, before it was Locksmith quarantined, revealed that the periodic trajectory adjustment, PDA, was not a fixed 4.05-hour cycle. It showed minute, nonlinear phase shifts in the timing of the thruster pulses, adjustments that occurred in response to unpredictable, real-time events, such as a major solar flare or a small, unmodeled perturbation from a distant asteroid belt. In engineering terms, this was real-time feedback control. A perfectly designed probe could follow a pre-calculated path, but only a probe capable of sensing and compensating for unforeseen environmental chaos could introduce the tiny, aperiodic shifts observed in the PDA data. Atlas was not merely executing code. It was adapting its trajectory to maintain the Sedna Rendezvous with absolute fidelity. The object was exhibiting judgment. This judgment, the ability to differentiate between gravitational noise and the necessary thruster firing point, was the smoking gun. It shifted the object from a complex machine to an autonomous sentinel. The implication was that the probe possessed an onboard AI or control system capable of calculating orbital mechanics faster and more precisely than any terrestrial supercomputer, using the trinary signal thrusters as its active reaction wheels. The realization was terrifying. The object is not a dead beacon. It is awake. The agencies operating the Locksmith Protocol understood this transition perfectly. They knew that the public could accept a distant, theoretical TNOY, but they could never accept an actively controlled, judgment-capable alien intelligence currently executing an orbital insertion deep within our system. The TNOY campaign was thus a political necessity, a deliberate act of scientific misdirection to prevent the collapse of social and political order that would inevitably follow the announcement of intentional, hostile reconnaissance. The Anomaly Committee's final defiant act was to synthesize all evidence into a single, comprehensive document, stripped of all technical jargon and focused solely on the implication of design. This was the thesis of intentionality, a stark, unassailable statement that 3I/Atlas was the ultimate proof of extrasolar intelligence that had mastered gravity, chemistry, and computation to achieve a centuries-long mission of covert surveillance. The distinction between error and signal was now a moral one. The official world had chosen to define Atlas as an error, a fleeting anomaly soon to be filtered out by time and bureaucratic silence. The Anomaly Committee chose to define it as a signal, a message of technological superiority written in the indelible ink of physics. The ultimate question was not one of science, but one of global transparency and existential readiness. Could humanity handle the truth that the most fundamental laws of its universe had just been intentionally broken, and the agency responsible was now establishing a permanent observation post at the edge of its home? The object was now past the orbit of Neptune, and the window for truth was closing forever. The publication of the Thesis of Intentionality, the final document synthesizing the unsolvable equation, the silent dynamo signature, and the proof of real-time feedback control, was the Anomaly Committee's ultimate defiant act. Released through encrypted channels to a global network of trusted academics and journalists, it presented the world with the unvarnished truth. 3I/Atlas was an autonomous, advanced sentinel completing a covert orbital insertion near Planet 9. The reaction was immediate and bifurcated. The mainstream scientific establishment, operating under the institutional mandate of the Locksmith Protocol, issued sweeping, preemptive denials. Papers appeared suggesting the VLBI data was corrupted by atmospheric turbulence. The iridium 193 was a contamination from the VLT's own mirrors, and the unsolvable equation was merely a complex artifact of the hypothetical, chaotic TNOY. They were not rebutting the evidence. They were manufacturing doubt. Yet, the raw mathematical clarity of the violation integral proved sticky. The astronomical community could ignore spectral anomalies, but they could not ignore a fundamental and sustained violation of the Newtonian in-body problem. The official silence fractured. Independent researchers, armed with the thesis of intentionality, began demanding access to the raw data files still locked away in the DSN Fuji and DSN Patagonia nodes. But the probe was not waiting for the human debate to conclude. By the time the thesis of intentionality was reaching mainstream media, 3I/Atlas was passing the Pluto-Sharon Center, smoothly executing the 3:2 resonance transition that would slingshot it toward the Sedna Rendezvous. The object was now gravitationally locked onto its final course, a path that was irrevocable and irreversible. The final act of the Atlas mission, the Sedna Rendezvous at $900 was the ultimate demonstration of its creator's confidence. The probe would achieve its zero relative velocity intercept with Sedna, the most distant object we know, and initiate its final activation sequence, the synchronized Trinora signal broadcast, before settling into the P9 observation orbit. Its mission would be complete, its sentry duty begun, entirely undetected by the official channels of its host star system. The disappearance of Dr. Richard Thorne and Dr. Anya Sharma now serves as the permanent, human footnote to the probe's technological triumph. They were the casualties of a global, institutional failure of nerve. They possessed the truth, the iridium 193 signature of the engine, the Trinora signal of the control system, and the unsolvable equation of the motion, and for that they were silenced. The true significance of 3I/Atlas lies not in its discovery, but in the global reaction to it. The object demonstrated that humanity, when faced with an existential truth that demands a radical shift in worldview, will unanimously choose silence and institutional denial over immediate, courageous confrontation. The locksmith protocol proved more potent than the silent dynamo. The global agencies were not protecting humanity from the probe. They were protecting the existing global power structure from the truth of its own cosmic insignificance. Conclusion: the final silence. 3I/Atlas is no longer a scientific mystery. It is a permanent interstellar sentinel now coasting toward its $900 target. Its mission is a stunning success. It executed a multi-million-year plan, camouflaged itself using the very laws of physics it violated, and secured a covert, long-duration observation post around the solar system's largest gravitational enigma. The probe is now watching. The ultimate conclusion we are forced to confront is twofold. 1. The technological chasm. The civilization that created Atlas operates on a scale that renders our current technology obsolete. They have mastered sustained anti-gravity, fusion power, and orbital mechanics with a precision that makes our most advanced spacecraft look like stone tools. The probe itself is a message of profound technological superiority and unfathomable patience. 2. The information blackout. The intentional coordinated erasure of the OC residuals, the iridium spectra, and the unsolvable equation is the greater revelation. It confirms that the greatest threat to human knowledge is not external, it is the internal, institutional fear of disruption. The object's camouflage succeeded, but the data censorship was the final, devastating confirmation that the world powers prioritize narrative control over existential truth. The final silence is not the silence of the cosmos. It is the silence imposed by fear. The official records will show that 3I/Atlas was an unusual CO2-rich comet that exited the solar system in late 2026. The true data, the Argus archive containing the Trinerus signal and the proof of the Sedna Rendezvous, remains confined to the shadows. We are left with the chilling certainty. We are not alone, and we are now under silent, perpetual surveillance by an entity that possesses the technological capability to enforce its own secrecy. The question is no longer about the object's nature, but about the motivation behind its covert observation of Planet 9. What is so important about the gravitational architecture of our hidden outer limits that warranted a probe of such sublime, terrifying precision? And what will they do with the data they are now silently broadcasting? The answer, like the Atlas itself, is far beyond our immediate reach, sealed by the final silence.